Thanks very much, David. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's a busy day. I have my own board, and so board days are always busy. And I thank you for taking the time to be here. I know you have lots of other things you could do with your time. So one of the other stories I didn't tell David, but in walking across from the faculty club, the other memory I had was walking by the gym and standing outside there for the first set of exams back in 1968, and I was shaking, I can tell you that. But had a lot of fun at Waterloo, so it's great to be back here and spend the next hour or so with you and talk about a subject which is, really important in the world, important to Canada, and important. Waterloo plays an important role in this area, and I'm quite humbled to be here. I do a lot of speaking across the country and really enjoy it, but to come to the center of kind of technology in Canada, being Waterloo and one of the centers in the world, I do so with some trepidation, given the technology expertise and deep knowledge that you have here, and following Mike, who has a fantastic technology company. It's a real honor. I brought with me some slides that are running on an IBM ThinkPad. I've got a few video clips, some fun ones to kind of make the point as I go and break up my talk, and we should have time for questions and answers as we go. What I'd like to do is really, I'm going to take a fairly broad interpretation of communities and not the narrow sense of, Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, Guelph as a community. And I know, smart communities in that context means something very specific, and the university has an important role to play in that as applied, as one of the government initiatives. I'm taking a slightly broader interpretation of communities to mean our society where we work and live, and what impact this is going to have on commerce, on our businesses. And I use business to be public sector and private sector, and I certainly include universities as a business, and hospitals and governments, along with our own industry and banks and insurance companies and so on. So that's kind of the commerce aspect. Quite frankly, that's where I spend the bulk of my time. That's where I spend the bulk of my time speaking. But it's kind of equally important to think about the impact this technology is having on us as a society, on us as people, on us as in the communities we work and live. And I would like to share, some of my thoughts in that area. And I've got some examples of what's going on that I think, cut right to the heart of society and people. And then I am going to touch on technology, but that isn't the bulk of what I brought, and that's not my, deep background in IBM. There's lots of interesting things going on, but I do make the statement right up front in most of the audiences I speak to, recognizing they tend to be business audiences, is this whole revolution is not about technology. It's not about technology. It's about business. It's about how we live and how we work and what we do with our time and how we want to spend our hours and how we acquire things and how we educate ourselves. The technology is really exciting, and for those of us in that business, we can spend hours and hours talking about it. But the real challenges aren't the technology ones. The real challenges are applying it, how to regulate it from a government point of view, the policies around it, and dealing with some of the, socioeconomic issues. And so we'll talk a bit about technology. I've included this chart. You almost can't have an internet presentation or a network presentation not have some chart that shows the hockey stick curve. And I know David's a hockey player, and I was out playing myself last night and thought about you and thought about this graph. But there's a couple of points I want to make. Is that this is absolutely going on, and we know we're going to be at 200 million users worldwide sometime this year, and we'll be at 500 million, if not trillions, over the next few years, and that's kind of guaranteed. But it isn't. People aren't doing it for the sake of saying, "Okay, I'm now on the internet." This is, why are 200 million people connected to the internet? They're doing things that we take in our everyday lives. They're buying tickets. They're buying goods. They're doing their banking. Their travel plans and golf and educating themselves. And so this is kind of another evolution of all the things that we do, around our lives. And it also is creating a tremendous industry in its own right. And one of the groups that I have been on the last 6 or 8 months that has been sponsored in part by Industry Minister Manley is something called the Canadian EBusiness Roundtable. And it's made up of people representing our industry, but also, Jeff Chisholm from the banks on it. Some of the government people are on it. There's, universities represented. And we were really looking at what we could do to accelerate, e-business in Canada. And we just produced a white paper, which you can certainly, all of you or any of you can get your hands on. Had 6 or 7 recommendation areas, and we're going to follow on that with activity. But as part of doing that work, Boston Consulting Group helped us kind of do a benchmark of where we think we are in Canada in this industry today. And we think we're at, a kind of a $28 billion industry of about 95,000 jobs in Canada. And we honestly believe that we can, move to $155 billion and, 180,000 highly paid jobs in and around this kind of industry. Forget the people that are using it. This is IT companies, this is .coms, this is consultant integrators, web hosting, and all of that sort of stuff. So in its own right, this is big business underneath this tremendous growth, and it is impacting all our institutions. The reason I put this chart in is the glamour around e-business is e-commerce, and it's buying and selling things on the net. You can't pick up the newspaper. Today's Globe had an article about the Christmas selling season. I was at a meeting yesterday from our Information Technology Association in Canada. It was CEOs from our industry, and we were talking about the subject of accelerating e-business in Canada, and we spent 95% of the time talking about buying things. What did consumers buy on the internet, and are we concerned about security, and will we give our credit cards over the... And those are all issues, and that is certainly a piece of the action, but it's important to recognize that it really is that thin sliver of opportunity versus the tremendous opportunity in business to business. And so I don't want to diminish the importance of selling things to consumers, because that's something we all experience and live in, but I'll tell you that the real tremendous gold and the activity, and probably IBM's activity is in the same proportion. Tremendous, tremendous leverage in business to business, and that's true for universities, true for governments, and true for all of us. Just another interesting point we talked about at lunch with David was that last Christmas, so a year ago, the most recent Christmas, there was a lot of concern that almost all of the buying activity of Canadians was onto U.S. sites, and certainly all the statistics back that up. Well, we still may be behind, but we work really hard as an industry and with the retailers in Canada to have a better presence on the web this Christmas. And in fact, we got there. So most of the retailers we have some level of activity with, so I'm quite familiar with it. Roots, HMV, Danier Leather, Sears Canada, Henry's Camera. And the numbers in the Globe today just start to make me feel a little better that the activity was up some 4 times, so quadrupled the amount of sales, some $627 million sold over Canadian websites. And over 50% of that was from out of Canada, primarily U.S. people buying off of Canadian sites. So, we're starting to see a bit of a reversal of all of the activity going south, which means jobs and so on. And I feel good about that. We've got a long way to go, and you have far more choice and far more variety when you go to the U.S. sites. But I'll tell you, the Canadian retailers are really coming back pretty strong, and I feel good about that. This networked era really does impact all industries, and again, you've probably seen charts like this before, and I chose this representation just to make a couple of points. First of all, some of the industries are moving at different rates and paces. And one of the things that's driving some to move faster than others is a function of how digital is your product or service. And secondly, how consumer focused are you in a way? Because many of those 200 million users are consumers in buying things. So when you think of a bank or an insurance company, their product is a digital product. There's no, we do carry cash around in our wallets, but 99% of all of the financial transactions in the world are electronic today, and they can't, as a financial institution, you can't do anything without designing a digital product. So they've had to move their very quickly to stay competitive. And the Canadian banks have done a pretty darn good job and are world-class in most of their offerings. Retailers, software developers, that's why books and CDs is such a big item on the web. They're both digitized very easily. And so, that's one of the drivers. But it's also clear that when you think of healthcare, when you think of the delivery of government services, when you think of education, distance learning, again, is an opportunity to digitize something that takes physically part in this classroom, quite easily. So we're going to see it affecting all industries, but certainly, the concept of physical to digital, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, and the pull of who your audience is driving some faster than others. What is an e-business? Again, I find, at IBM we coined the term e-business a couple of years ago to refer to all of the ways that internet technology is being used by, I'll say, our customers, be they consumers, small business people, large business people, governments, health institutions, and everything. And many times in newspapers and so on, people will immediately take e-business and translate it into e-commerce. And then they translate e-commerce into buying things on the net. And the concept of e-business is much, much broader than that. Because I would put in that distance learning over the web. We in IBM have moved about 40% of our internal education, and we take a lot of education, is all over the intranet now. I just spent the first week or two of this year taking some e-business courses, which were videos over our intranet that essentially IBMers around the world were taking all at the same time. We could do it at the time we wanted, sitting at home and dropping this down over our, over the intranet using some compression technology and so on that we have, and it works very, very effectively. So that's an e-business application. Healthcare, delivering x-rays, delivering information to doctors, outreach to patients, that's all in the e-business space. So it's a lot broader than just buying and selling things. I want to spend a minute about why e-business. There's lots of again, you can pick up newspapers, lots of discussion about why do these .com companies have such high market capitalizations? Why is this kind of stock market phenomenon going on? Why can Amazon.com command such a premium in the stock market and make no money on the bottom line and no profits? And I have to truly admit I'm not an expert in stock markets, and I don't know. But I happen to feel that they're relatively efficient. And over time, these businesses, on an efficient basis, will figure out what the business model is, and the investors will figure that out. But on a business-to-business basis, there is lots of money being made today using internet technology. And that's the point of this slide. Whether you're saving money on the cost side, whether you're growing your revenue. In IBM, we moved much of our procurement to the net. Large and small companies. We're saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year versus our old process of doing it on a manual basis and doing it on a paper basis. That's real savings to the bottom line. It shows up in our earnings. It's a return to our shareholders. And there are many examples of that in these different industries. So this isn't just about forming a .com company, doing an IPO, and watching your stock rise, and then all the entrepreneurs that started the company becoming millionaires. This isn't about that. I mean, that's one piece of this activity that's underway, but there's real strong business reasons why retailers, banks, insurance companies, the cost to a bank of one of us walking in a branch and doing a transaction is several dollars per transaction. If we do it at an ATM, it's $1.30, and if we do it on the net, it's 20 cents a transaction. So the economics of that are quite significant. Now, Jeff Chisholm, who's coming in to see you in a week, would say to me, yes, John, but I haven't been able to reduce the number of branches I have when I offer all these new things over the web, because you want choice. We all want choice. So the trick for any business is to figure out, with this new channel of distribution over the web, how do I spread my investments, my marketing expense across these different channels? Because the physical branches aren't all going away. The physical malls aren't all going away. In my case, the physical IBM salespeople aren't all going on the way. But boy, a lot of our customers are doing a lot more over the web. And so that's what we get, as business people, get paid money to figure out how to do it. But there is real dollars here. And this little commercial, which some of you may have seen, makes the point.
Cut the act, Phil. I need to tell management what's happening with our website in terms they can understand.
We're way beyond website, Dan. We're talking supply chain management, implementing API.
These guys aren't technical. Pretend I'm in grammar school.
Okay. We're web enabling core business processes, creating HTML on the fly using Domino with a node actor.
Pretend I'm in kindergarten.
Every buck we spend, we'll earn $2 back by the end of the year.
So there's some real business reasons driving a lot of this activity. Now this is, again, in as a reminder for me to talk about speed on the net, because, and it has lots of interesting ramifications. I will talk a minute about speed of transactions, because when things move from physical to digital, you reduce time and distance. And when you reduce time and distance, it's obviously a speed issue. But when you do that, you can save a lot of money in moving things from physical to digital. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But the thing I wanted to talk about here is the change it's making in terms of business. The change it's doing in our cycle of how we plan and what businesses we're in and who we think our competitors are. You know, there's something like, we think about 500 .coms a month being started, new ones, every month in the United States today. And in Canada, you can just probably ratio that and say we're maybe not quite as active as Silicon Valley or Silly Valley, I guess, as it's being referred to these days. But there's a lot of activity in Canada as well, and you know, the Waterloo region is kind of a source of a lot of that. And there are just two examples here of how fast is net fast. One is a company, Inc., which was a San Francisco online buying club that went from kind of an idea, there were a group of guys doing some backpacking in the Sierras, to a full-fledged company, complete with business plan and startup money, so they managed to get to a venture capital company and get money in just 3 weeks. Group of guys out hiking, we got an idea for this online business, we go out and get a few $1 million of venture capital money, and we're up and running in about 3 weeks. So how fast is net fast? That's pretty fast if you happen to be in one of the a traditional business person in that industry. Another example is this goodhome.com, went from kind of idea to business plan to first round of venture capital financing to a merger to a kind of an IPO in just kind of 10 weeks. And so it has, we'll talk about the speed of transactions in a minute, but this is just saying in our business, you know, this has had a tremendous impact on us. You know, in business school, people talk about a 5-year plan. How good is a 5-year plan in this environment? It's useless. Any time you spend on a 5-year plan is just, you know, is wasted time. You know, a lot of companies in this business, including our own, are rewriting their strategy almost every quarter. And the businesses are morphing themselves every 6 months. So, you know, they try a business model. It says, okay, I'm gonna get into this business, and 6 months later they've entirely morphed themselves and probably gone through a merger and are in a different business model. So it's changing the way commerce is done around the world, and it's causing impacts on organizations, hierarchies. You know, if you run a company and your competitors are moving in and out of your business every quarter, you can't afford the traditional organization of command and control and having vice presidents and this chain of command and, you know, having decisions go up the chain and back down the chain and everything. It doesn't work anymore. So organizations are flatter, they're more entrepreneurial, they're moving faster, budget cycles are different. You know, even an annual budget today is up for grabs when it comes to some of these newer kind of .com areas. And so this speed thing is having a big impact on our business. And knowing that I was going to have this chart in my pitch, I was reading the Globe this morning intrigued by Dilbert. The Dilbert strip says, Dilbert's sitting there and he says, should I stay at my current job where the commute is easy? Or should I risk everything and join a fast-paced startup company? And then the two little dudes that show up say, I joined a fast-paced startup company while you were talking. And the other guy says, mine went through an IPO. And it really does, it does feel like that, being in this industry. We grab hold of one of these .coms on a Friday, and you have a discussion about what's the business model, and they say, yeah, we need $3 million in the next quarter to go into servers and software, and oh, by the way, we got our first round of venture capital financing, we got $10 million, we're going to go and make some acquisitions, and oh, by the way, I'm talking to a couple of your competitors, and oh, by the way, I'm going to make a decision next Wednesday on which hardware and software I'm going to go with. Now, this is not the IBM I joined in 1973 when I graduated from Waterloo. This is a very different business we're in today, and we move at that kind of pace. So speed does matter. I want to talk, I got a couple of charts on what is this networked era all about, and I could spend the whole afternoon on this and I won't, but suffice it to say, if you look on the left-hand side, we start to think of this thing we call the E line. And above the E line is where born on the web companies operate, where the .coms companies operate, and quite frankly, where many of us as traditional businesses are trying to get to operate. Not for all our business, but for some pieces of it. And so in many ways, the new economy is above the E line. And so if you're a traditional business, you better figure out what your competitors are doing, what you have to do to be competitive in the new economy, or you'll go out of business. Encyclopedia Britannica is the best example of that. There's a company that was selling physical encyclopedias for how many years? A lot, right? And how much, I don't know, some people here probably bought them. I have. We paid over thousands of dollars for these physical encyclopedias. And they just basically, their whole business, just a couple of months ago, they announced they're out of the physical book distribution, and all of the content on Encyclopedia Britannica is now free on the internet, and their business model is obviously through advertising and through other mechanisms to raise revenue. But there's a company that was pretty darn slow to recognize the world had changed big time, and they virtually almost went out of business. So we'll see how their new model does. So businesses, we're talking about this commerce segment of the network world. Businesses are trying to figure out how to exist in the new economy, which is above the E line. True for new startups, it's true for traditional businesses. And I would suggest it's true for the university. How active is the University of Waterloo as a traditional business figuring out how to operate in the new economy? I'd say that's true for all universities around the world. And some are moving faster than others. And it's obviously not going to replace everything that's traditional, but you sure want to, if you're an institution in the future, you're going to be operating above the E line and up below it. These are some characteristics on the right that I think are, again, interesting to see the importance of them. First of all, communities. You're running a seminar series called Smart Communities. Well, in a network world, it is all about communities. New communities springing up, new alliances, new combinations of businesses that are taking shape. Digital does replace physical, and it's happening all over the place, including in universities where you could, through simulation, do a lot of the things that you would have done in a physical wet lab in chemistry or something, in the past, through discovering drugs, through nuclear, explosions, through, flying airplanes, through doing, learning medicine, you name it. Digital is replacing physical, and it's being done, for very important kind of cost reasons. And it's obviously about knowledge and leveraging knowledge. And then the last thing is it really does cut across boundaries. And so, we got into an esoteric discussion at our Information Technology Association of Canada, which is a group, again, of IT industry executives in Canada, saying, is the Canada a relevant term anymore in the name of our group? Because most of our group do business outside of Canada. We're all in this network world. And really, these borders become, less and less important. This is one of my favorite charts, and it's something that I think is going on that is less obvious to everybody, and that is something we call value nets. But these new combinations of companies are coming together to create value for customers or to change competitive landscape. Combinations that you wouldn't even have dreamed of several years ago. IBM and Cisco, we used to compete with each other every day in the marketplace, and yet we have a value net today where we sell them technology, we go together to other customers, Ford and Oracle, General Motors and Microsoft, combinations, Royal Bank and AOL, combinations that again, even 2 years ago you would never have dreamed of seeing in the marketplace. And the network world is forcing this to happen, and the network world facilitates its happening. You know, companies start up in almost any industry. You can start up with a few people and become a world-class company and not hire any more people. You outsource all of your key activity. You outsource your financials, you outsource your human resources, you outsource your fulfillment, you outsource your, the creation of your product. There's an insurance company in Europe which has, I'm told, 10–15% market share in the property and casualty marketplace. It's 15 people, in Zurich, Switzerland, and they outsource everything about their business. And it's basically a virtual company. And so, if you're in any kind of business today, or you have to figure out, even if you're large or small, you have to figure out what combination of companies is going to come at me as my competitor, because it'll be different. And the banks are looking at that right now. What combinations of competitors are going to hit me that weren't there, over the last 10 years. And so you're seeing it, again, every day in the newspapers. You pick it up, you'll see a different combination come together in a value net. And when you think about it, linking up electronically with your suppliers, Toronto Dominion Bank announced a joint venture with Commerce One. Commerce One is a web company that is into procurement. They've got manufacturing companies and all this. And all of a sudden, you've got TD Bank over here doing a joint venture with Commerce One. And it is about business to business, and it's about the value those two can now bring to the marketplace that wasn't there before they kind of got together. So, I mean, if there's one thing that you leave about thinking about the impact of a network world on your communities and on your business life, think about the impact it's having in terms of value nets or new value nets that are being created. And this little vignette, I think, says it better than I can. That's sort of a fun story, but that's going on all around the world. I mean, we put most of our procurement on the web. We've gone to auctioning some of it, and we've found Mitchcos that we didn't know existed in terms of new suppliers to the IBM company that bring a different value proposition than some of the ones we had before. Now I'm going to run through a few examples, and I'll move out of business and get into some education and health ones, but I wanted to just talk about Safeway, the grocery company in the UK, because they're really pushing some really interesting things. And in a way, I'd love to be a consumer in UK, because all of the grocery business in UK is more competitive, I think, than it is anywhere, and they're doing some really interesting things. But up there in the top, they started with point-of-sale terminals, which every grocer has today, including in Canada, and they collect point-of-sale information in their IBM large computer and their DB2 databases and their storage products and everything. And that's done, again, all over the world by almost every retailer. But very few of them actually use that information. Very few of them know what you buy when you go into a store. Very few of them, Loblaws knows what sells in general. They know by stock keeping unit what sells. But they don't know that John Wetmore is one of their best customers, and that the Wetmore family buys a heck of a lot of stuff with teenage boys. And Safeway in the US now, or in the UK, does know that now. They know it, because they've got a loyalty card. So they moved over to, loyalty cards and then starting to look at buying patterns. And then they moved more recently into, going into the store with a handheld. So you can go into a store, you take a Palm Pilot, you kind of plug it in, it says, "Welcome, Mr. Wetmore. We've got some specials for you particular today, because we know, you guys go through lots of Gatorade, and, you do this and you do that." And as I shop, as I go around the store, it offers me specials. Oh, you're stopped in front of the, the Rice Krispies today. That's, you go through a lot of those, 10% off, for the extra big box today. So that's underway today. And this, this issue of privacy is an interesting one because it starts to cut into, what will we as consumers allow companies like this to do in terms of mining our information. And I believe, and Safeway is finding, that if the value proposition is right, I mean, if they come back to me with the right deal, I will let them mine my information. I don't want them to sell it. I don't want to have somebody, direct mail me something that says, oh, by the way, I know you bought peanut butter last week. But if Safeway is going to use it in the right way for me, I'm probably going to let them do that. And they found that. They asked, when the people signed up for Loyalty Card, they asked people to tick off, can we use the information to help put deals together for you? And of course, some people didn't tick that off positively. And so they found when they went into the store and they signed on, most people that sign on, it says, welcome, Mr. Wetmore, great to have you here today. The ones that didn't sign, of course, it didn't say anything in the little screen, right? It was kind of blank. And so right away, people complained, why doesn't it say, welcome, Mrs. Smith? It does for my friends. And they had to say, well, because you didn't really approve that we would know you're there, kind of thing. But if you approve that, well, it'll say, welcome, Mrs. Smith, tomorrow. So it's just one little anecdote. But they've moved to shopping over the internet now. So again, you do your shopping at home with your Palm Pilot. You have your grocery list. You go through your cupboard. You can even scan in on the UPC code in your Palm Pilot. Creates what you want, and you plug it in, and a Zoom your order goes off. At night when you come home from work and you go pick it up, at 5 o'clock the next day, you specify when you want to pick it up or whether you want it delivered and so on. So this is happening today, and there's real strong business reasons for it, and we're going to see this, change the way we go about our lives. Buying groceries online, there's lots of capability today in Canada to do that and lots in the US, and whether anybody's going to make any money in the short term remains yet to be seen. And this little vignette is one of our more recent commercials, and we're running it. You may have seen it.
Excuse me, sir. Forgot your receipt.
Checkout lines. This is the future of e-business.
Have a nice day.
I've been told that that anybody younger than 30 immediately gets that commercial, and some of us others are having a little more challenging time figuring out why did the guard let him go? What? And I won't do a test here to see anything. This is a government example, and I would say this is a pretty straightforward one, but it is very powerful. We spent, I think, 3 years working with the Canada Patent Office and digitizing all the patent information for the last 40 years. I mean, it was a big project, millions of dollars. It runs on a large IBM computer, and it was a long project. And all it did was really digitize what was there before. But web enabling that so that all the users could now get access to that information on the web was a much shorter, simpler application. And that's why the return on investment of these web applications is so great, because in a lot of cases they're built on 30 years of information processing that's already been done. So today, I mean, this is a great example of government delivery of information that's valuable to, not to everybody, because not all of us want to go look at patents, but there are lots of people in our industry and others that do that every day in and day out, and lawyers and so on. And it's one example of the government. We're going to see them move in lots of other directions. In the health area, I personally feel we're so under-penetrated or under-leveraged, or the opportunity in health is so significant to change how health is delivered in Canada. And the biggest challenge is that the decision-making process is so convoluted and distributed and departmentalized. Every hospital in Canada is one decision-making body, and within a hospital every department is, and so it's very hard to get critical mass to make big decisions. But at the Hospital for Sick Kids Health Network, which we've just started, is sick kids in about 7 or 8 universities, of hospitals that have patients moving back and forth. We're really moving to an electronic basis of communication. And then around that network, they've got a website which is providing a lot of information to parents and kids who are coming to the hospital. They have an intranet now for delivering education to the senior staff related to education they have to take with videos and courses. And so it's one example of in the health area. This is another one. It happens to be for the Department of Defense in the U.S., but it is an example of the tremendous leverage because the government is one decision-making body in the U.S. and the Department of Defense has a lot of people in the Army and the Air Force and the Navy and all the other groups, and they have doctors and they have patients and they've automated the delivery of x-rays and radiology reports around the entire defense structure in a way that means doctors can look at them in New York for patients in California, and the tremendous leverage because it was one decision-making body. In Canada, I mean, the technology is there to deliver that today, but boy, is it hard to get a big enough critical mass to start that. So we're starting to see it in small groups of hospitals. Some of the regionalization is going to help us do this. But the technology is there to do it today, and the benefits for the health system are fantastic. Any of you that have had parents or relatives that have been fighting cancer or something and go from doctor to doctor to doctor, know in Canada you have to physically carry your report. You have to tell the story to every doctor you meet. I mean, it really is almost as onerous as fighting the darn disease, and that's not necessary. Think about the impact on on us as patients and everything if we could just break through some of the privacy issues, some of the decision-making issues, and make an investment in the right network solutions will be fantastic. I happen to think that the networked era can have a tremendously positive impact on education, and particularly K-12 education, but I think, let me just finish this little section with
Next page. Close that. All right, beautiful. Sell. All right, highlight 4. Scroll up.
The voice-activated wearable computer. It may be far out.
Hi, Donna. Oh, yeah, the meeting was fine.
But it's not far off.
I'll be on the afternoon class.
I want to spend a minute. So I've talked about commerce, I've talked about technology and pervasive computing and deep computing. I do want to make the point, though, again, I'm asked about, isn't this very impersonal? Aren't we losing touch with society? And isn't this, what are all the problems around, kids are going to spend too much time on computers and not know how to speak English or write English? And there's all sorts of issues, and we'll deal with them. But the network world is very, very liberating and very empowering for many people in our society. And I think of people with disabilities and think of people who are stuck in their homes, whether they're sick or whether they're elderly or whether they can't get out. Today, the capability is there for them to work, to visit anywhere in the world, to become an expert in any field, to do all sorts of things. And we hired a co-op student that was a quadriplegic up in Thunder Bay. They were very, very productive in working, on our computers and participating in meetings with the staff and everything, and didn't have to leave Thunder Bay. We never were in Toronto in terms of the capability. So this technology is very empowering and will have, I think, a very positive effect on our society. And this is just one example of some of the neat things that are going on.
The Oriental culture has a disadvantage because the difficulty in input. To do Chinese speech recognition, we need to improve recognition algorithm. Also, we need fast computers. Now both conditions are there.
I'm painfully slow in typing.
It takes so long to master the skill typing Chinese.
我带来我公司的最新产品。句号，请在明天上午召开联席会议。
It's just fast.
讨论销售合作的问题。句号。
This is one that I just stuck in the presentation. I just kind of saw it the other day. It's called Pebbles, and it's some work that research work's doing at Ryerson U of T and a company called tell us something. I don't have it here. Telebotics, and it's got some IBM technology in it. But the concept is basically delivering education to somebody, a child who is sick or is not able to be in the classroom. And so the example, I think there was one at Sick Kids. There was another one with a little girl on dialysis machine who basically, this is a PC with video conferencing capability, very easy to use joystick, so you drive it. And again, the ability to have a child in a hospital bed in Sick Kids with the joystick participating in a class where there's an equivalent kind of Pebbles machine, a robot sitting in the class that represents her, can move the arms and wave to the kids and do all, she can participate in the conversations. The liberating impact of that in terms of the impact on the quality of life of that particular child is replicable many, many times over in our networked world. We did a website for the Red Cross, which is called disasterrelief.org, and it gets about 40,000 hits a day. But when there's a disaster underway, a hurricane, an earthquake, a flood or something, it gets millions of hits a day. And it's going to be a source for, think of all the families that are worried about their relatives in Chile or whatever when something happens. Very simple concept, and yet very powerful in terms of putting the information that will allow people to feel more comfortable with what's going on without burning up all the phone lines into Chile and not getting through and all those worries. So simple concept, but a neat example of the power in society of the world we're living in. Again, the impact on people is something that could occupy an entire lecture, but suffice it to say, in IBM, the most important thing in our business is our people, and that's why we are so focused on having a good relationship at Waterloo and hiring great Waterloo grads because it's the future of our business. And we hired last year across Canada 500 or 600 grads. We're out on campuses again hiring lots of people to come into our business. We hire 1,000 people a day around the world to a growing business. But hiring them is one thing, and then motivating them and retaining them in this high mobile world of skills and so on is another factor entirely. And so the whole issue of the mobility of your workforce, work-life balance, diversity, providing the right tools, moving at web speed, providing the right compensation package, competing with the dot-coms, those are issues that I wrestle with every day that my predecessors didn't have to worry about as much. 1 in 2 of the 17,000 IBMers across the country in IBM Canada are new to IBM in the last 3 or 4 years. And so it's a different workforce today. The students that are here have different desires, different expectations when they come to work for a company like IBM going forward. And if we're not responsive to that, we will not be successful. Work-life balance is an important one. Many of our people work at home. Some great examples of businesses, on the net that exist because, a wife or a husband has decided to stay home and raise, a family and also run a business. And so, this issue of our workers, of our employees, is a big impact, not just for IBM and the IT industry, but for the banks and the insurance companies. Ask Jeff Chisholm when he's here what the impact of this network world is having on the types of people that he needs in the bank. And it has a big impact. Lifelong learning. We obviously need to retrain a whole bunch of our society, and this is where the university can help, where the colleges can help, and it's where industry has to, shell out some money. So, people. It doesn't come free either. With everything good in life, there's kind of a flip side to it that has to be managed. And so there are all sorts of issues, and I don't get negative about these. On the other hand, we're working on them. There's no easy solutions. Things like pornography, things about the IT literacy, things about like security and privacy. I think security today can be solved with technology. We have the hardware and software really that can make things very, very, very secure if you put it into your network. If you don't invest in the security, if you don't encrypt your transaction, it's like walking around with a cell phone or a portable phone, analog phone in your house. Everybody in the neighborhood can listen to it, with a simple scanner for a couple $100, and that's going on every day. So if you don't invest in a digital phone or you don't invest in something to protect yourself, there is no security. Well, we can solve security. Privacy is a different issue. We can make everything private by putting the right security around it, but then you get into the policy decisions of, you know, if you're a retailer, how do you mine the information and what do you do with it? And you sell it to every Tom, Dick, and Harry who comes by for a quick buck. If we have a lot of irresponsible business people, then the governments and consumers and everybody are going to kind of jump on these issues very, very quickly, and it will really ruin the thing for everybody. So we've got to work through privacy as a society, and you know, I think you should be looking at companies that are reputable, that put a privacy statement on their websites that say, you know, we're going to respect your personal privacy. If you want to register to use, you know, we'll make it worth your while to register with us, but otherwise we're not going to, you know, we're not going to behind your back do a lot of stupid things. So privacy issues, this digital divide, I think there was an article in the Star on the weekend, Toronto Star, which basically said, are we creating a know and know-not society versus the have and have-not society? And I think the risk is there if we don't work at it, but I'd say the flip side of that is we participated in an Aboriginal career fair in Ottawa a couple months ago, and it was grades 6, 7, and 8 Aboriginal kids from across Canada, and their internet literacy was 98%. It was as good as a group of kids you'd pull out of schools in Waterloo or better. And so it has a tremendous ability to close this gap, you know, if we're wise about what we do that way. Government regulation can be a real issue in all this because the internet world is going to not respect government borders. So if every government in the world has a different policy on privacy or a different policy on taxation or a different policy on consumer protection, the thing won't work. And so, you know, the World Trade Organizations, the OECD and everybody are working at, can we get harmonization of countries around the world so that this thing can work to the benefit of all of us? Because, you know, governments, I mean, the CRTC in Canada last summer looked at whether they should regulate the internet or not. And of course, we were there lobbying, this is the stupid thing you could ever do in your life, you know. You could set Canada back 10 years, and fortunately they made a good decision. They said, no, we're not going to for now, or something like that. So this is an issue that is always there, and we work hard at making sure that we're front and center on it. And then there's lots of others, pornography and things. Bandwidth is an interesting one because, you know, I go to talk to Nortel and Bell and all these people, and they can amaze me with as much as I can talk about microprocessors, they can talk about breakthroughs in fiber optics. And it's all true. But the last mile in the communication bandwidth today is still a major, major issue for us relative to bandwidth. And so I personally think we'll get over that, but today it's still, you know, a fairly big issue to all of these neat applications that I showed you there that require pretty broad bandwidth. This is really just my close chart to say the world has changed. There's a set of parameters that are quite traditional there, and you know, they really are changing for businesses, for schools, for universities, for governments in the new world. And that's, you know, pretty well it. I come back to where we started. I used a broad interpretation of Spark communities, but the network world is changing everything we do in terms of work and home and health and governments, and it really is an exciting future with lots of tough issues that we have to face from a social point of view. So why don't I open it up for questions?
There are two concerns when it comes to Canada's ability to compete in this new economy. First of all, the risk-averse venture capital, and also the position taken by major Canadian companies that they cannot compete with U.S. companies in terms of attracting and retaining the best employees. What are your views on this?
I don't know how many of you heard the question, but basically, you know, what are there are several concerns in Canada about being able to compete with U.S. in terms of attracting the bright and best. And I participate in this National EBusiness Council, as I talked about. We came up with a whole set of recommendations which direct themselves right at what you're talking about. I happen to have inherited or agreed to, or whatever the term is, to lead the team that's going to focus on accelerating e-business in traditional Canadian businesses, large and small. So we're going to go on an awareness campaign across the country. We're going to try and through education, we've got some suggestions in there for some incentives. One of the ones that I wanted the government to consider, and we'll see if it's in the budget or not, was When, on the Y2K issue, we convinced the government to put a $50,000 accelerated write-off for small businesses to make the changes necessary to be ready for Y2K. And it worked wonders. I had neighbors who were small business people, and they didn't really even know Y2K, but they knew that for $50K they could get an accelerated write-off and get some new, PC hardware and software. That kind of incentive rolled into e-business of some type would be an incentive for small businesses to at least look at maybe enabling themselves more. So I think I'm optimistic that we will get Canadian businesses to make the investments to be competitive. And I've already seen more activity in the last 4 or 5 months than I saw in the prior year. I mentioned retail. I think we're coming along reasonably well in retail. I talked to CEOs and senior executives in businesses large and small across Canada, and they're all on the e-business thing. Where do I make my investments? They take big gulps when they say, gee, can I really invest a few $1 million in this online procurement system? But I believe they're going to make those investments. And so I think we'll get there with Canada. I think we will compete. Not in every case, but we'll have a pretty competitive industry. The other thing on attracting and retaining the best and brightest is there's a whole set of recommendations we've made to the government around tax rates on income, on capital gains treatment, on the ability, on the availability of venture capital money that we think also will see some movement in the budget, by the finance minister this go round, and we think he'll make a commitment over the next 5 years to change a number of those things. So we continue to work on them. I've seen a change in venture capital activity in Canada in the last 3 months, again, greater than the prior year. There's been, I think, 4 new startup companies, VC startup, in the Toronto area just in the last month and a half with some pretty good money behind them. And so if we can get the environment, I'll call it tax rates, capital gain treatment, I think you'll see the government, we're sort of keeping our fingers crossed that the government will make an announcement on stock options that to help a little bit with the tax treatment of those. And those are all the things that make the entrepreneurs in many ways go to the US rather than kind of stay in Canada. And again, I'm reasonably optimistic we'll solve some of those. It's a tough go, but I'm an optimist by nature. I think we understand the issues, and I think there's kind of a growing interest in Canada, both in the government and the private sector, to help fix some of those. What else? Okay.
I'm wondering what you see as the major barriers to the United States in all of this technology. In terms of the society's indoctrination to it, or the absorption of the technology to identify the business and consumer business in the area. Is there an overriding barrier that may not be aware of?
I personally think the culture issue of taking risk is a big one. You hit a nail on the head a bit in saying the technology is there to do all this. Is the entrepreneurial risk-taking mental set to jump out there and create the .com, or is a traditional business to invest the $5 or $10 million to go on the web and figure it out? You may lose some money for a while. So I'll call it the business case in a way, in terms of doing it, is maybe the biggest obstacle at the moment. Canadian companies have proven that we can install the best applications in the world. We don't take a back seat to anybody. Look at the Canadian banks. They're really leading edge. I mean, we have in IBM Canada, we have skills that are in demand right around the world for creating web systems, for doing consulting, so we have the best technology, we have brain power. In Canada, we've proven we can write software that's better than almost anybody else in the world. It's a real national treasure, and again, Waterloo is a great resource in terms of creating this. So then you say, okay, what is the business environment around using all that brain power and all that knowledge to create business value? And that's probably the biggest roadblock at the moment. And I'd almost say in a way it's cultural, and we'll get over it. Well, certainly it's a gigantic market. And the interesting thing about services, services in IBM represents about 50% of our revenue. So let's say we'll round to $5 billion is IBM Canada's revenue, and half of that is services revenue, and it didn't almost non-existent about 5 years ago. So it's a tremendous growth. Services around the world is growing about 15 or 16%. And the interesting thing is no company, I mean IBM is the largest services IT company in the world at 30 billion, say, and we represent a single digit of share. So it's a gigantic marketplace that has, you know, companies of one person, so individual consultants, zillions of people that'll do web pages for you, and so we think in IBM there's lots of room for all these other businesses, but we're quite confident that, you know, we have the skills and expertise to grow. And when you think about IBM, the thing that gets us so excited about this network world is it is server-centric to a certain degree. You know, there's all these applications that take place on these large computers that are cheap and small now. I mean, they're not large in a physical sense. The ability to take the web and connect it to the back-end systems is something that IBM has had the expertise in that for 30 years. So in many ways, we do the heavy lifting in the internet world today. We don't get the glamour of, you know, some of the more fancy web design houses and so on. We do have, as I tell our customers, we have fancy design houses, and we have people with earrings and ponytails and long hair and sandals. And I mean, we've got a lot of that in IBM. But the other thing we have is that we connect front ends to back ends. So the banks, we work with every one of the banks on their PC internet banking because we understand online banking in the back end. You know, we've got a whole bunch of companies that have come to us on the rebound where they've started their initial web experience as a PC that, you know, that somebody put together for them, fairly inexpensive, and they outgrow it so quickly, and they run into all sorts of problems with connecting to their online systems. And so the ability to marry the web with the traditional IT world is got tons of services opportunity in it. And that's really where IBM's strength is. And so, you know, we're investing a lot in EBusiness. You'll see in the US we announced these innovation centers where we have one in Atlanta. We're going to have 4 or 5 in the US, and we'll have several in Canada. And we'll be increasing our population, you know, by hundreds, if not thousands of people in these innovation centers doing services work. So it's a great opportunity, but it's such a large business that if we can just take our single digit of market share, 5 or 6%, and double it, that's a tremendous growth for us. I think that I'm going to have to wrap up, but let me thank you for your time and your interest in being here. It really is an exciting world, and smart communities come with lots of tremendous opportunity, and there are some things that we have to manage, but thank you for your time.